Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Adult Sunday School lesson for February the 4th, 2024. This week's lesson is a New Testament lesson from the Gospel of Mark. It's entitled Jesus, the Hidden Healer. This begins a new month and a new unit of study. This one is entitled Seeking Jesus. And it has to do as we approach Easter, we reflect on the spiritual work of Jesus on our behalf. And so the lesson for February 4th is Jesus, the Hidden Healer. Next week, Jesus, the image of God. Then the following week, Jesus, the righteous sufferer. And then the fourth and last lesson in the month, is entitled Jesus, the faithful justifier, from the book of Romans. These gospel lessons establish Jesus' authority, and the lessons from Peter and Paul provide theology for the early church, which prevails for us even today. From these lessons, we will learn more about Jesus as Messiah, and his Messiahship becomes known to all after the resurrection miracle of Easter. So today's lesson begins the unit in which we will look at the healing ministry of Jesus in some fashion. You can see that from this depiction of the church year, we finish with Advent down in the lower left-hand portion of the screen. Last Sunday was Epiphany Sunday, and this Sunday we're starting to look ahead towards Lent, the season of Lent, and Ash Wednesday, which will be on February 14th. It's the next milestone. Then you can see there are 5 Sundays of Lent, culminating in Easter, which this year is March the 31st. So that's what we will be dealing with over the next few weeks and months. Unit theme is Seeking Jesus. Our lesson writer wants to emphasize that the gradual revelation of Jesus' authority and mission came about over time. It wasn't known to all, or not known even to the inner group of disciples in the beginning, but as Jesus worked and ministered among us, it became more evident. From the gospel accounts, Jesus did not seek personal attention or fame. Unlike people today, many people want to emphasize themselves. Jesus did not glorify himself, but he came to serve and heal. And these service roles and healing roles and helping people, this was much different than was expected of the Christ. They were seeking a military leader, someone like David who would restore the kingdom. But Jesus seems to want his authority kept a secret. This is called the messianic secret, because he admonishes those he helps and even the disciples not to spread word about what he is saying and doing. But word of his actions spreads like wildfire or like a thunderclap until all creation recognizes his authority. Our gospel writer in this year, the B year in the lectionary, is the Gospel of Mark, so we will be having many gospel lessons from Mark this whole year. But the Gospel of Mark is generally considered the first narrative gospel, the first one written, that is, written as a narrative or as a story of Jesus. Dates from about 70 of the Common Era. There's some historical reference in the Gospel of Mark dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred in 70 of the Common Era. So many people think that Mark's gospel must have been written after that occurred. But of the four canonical gospels, Mark's is, of course, the shortest. There were probably earlier collections of the sayings and parables of Jesus that circulated without any story associated with them. That is, without any narrative. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor." Jesus said, thus and so, with no narrative framework around them. And it's believed that Mark's gospel is the first to actually place a framework or a narrative context for many of the sayings and parables of Jesus. So this makes Mark the first evangelist to set Jesus' words into a story, not just isolated sayings. The Gospel of Mark is light on talk, heavy on action. It can be represented by 9 sandwiches. If we had more time, we could talk about these Mark sandwiches, in which the Gospel account is of one activity is surrounded by bread on both sides, which relates to that Gospel activity. These have been labeled sandwiches, and it's a characteristic of Mark's Gospel that's not in the other 4 Gospels. It's quite an interesting story to look at. Of course, that's for another day. One of the most interesting aspects of Mark's Gospel is that there's 2 endings. There's a short one, which ends at the empty tomb, where the disciples fled in fear. And it seems that that shorter ending was unsatisfactory in some regard. So perhaps a longer ending that talks about events after the empty tomb has been added to the gospel at some point. Perhaps by Mark himself, but probably by a later author. As far as our lesson introduction is concerned, this depicts one action-packed day when Jesus, along with his 4 disciples, attend synagogue in Capernaum, a city on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. So they start at synagogue at Capernaum. Synagogue differs from today's churches and differs from the temple experience back in Jesus' day in that the synagogue were mainly centers of teaching. Prayer, reading, and sermonette was basically what would occur at the synagogue services. There's no music, no singing, no sacrifices. These would be characteristic of a fuller worship experience such as at the temple in Jerusalem. But in synagogue, as long as there were 10 adult males present in each geographical location, a synagogue could be built. And so the city of Capernaum had a synagogue. The thing is, any qualified male might be asked to deliver the sermonette. So you could have lots of visiting people who would come through, such as Jesus, a visiting rabbi, or a visiting priest of some sort might be asked to give the sermonette. And evidently Jesus was asked by the leader of the synagogue to provide the message for this occasion. So let's read. Astonishing authority. Mark 1:21 through 24 says, "They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, 'What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God.'" It's funny, one of the first testimonials to the authority of Jesus comes from demonic spirit or one that's not even a human. It just goes to show you the fame and power of Jesus. Knew no bounds. Jesus' teaching in this synagogue, it says, it astounded the hearers because his authority seemed much different from the run-of-the-mill sermonette that they might hear from other religious teachers or scribes. Mark doesn't give us the content of Jesus' message or what his teaching was, but the results were clear enough. An afflicted, demon-possessed man was exorcised, but not without a struggle. Calling a power by its name could defeat that power, or at least that was part of the thinking back in Jesus' day. So perhaps this evil spirit tried this in reverse by calling out who Jesus was, trying to gain some authority or power over Jesus. You know, this idea of the name is a potent concept in Scripture, and you know, there are some writings that indicate in our blessed state in heaven we will be given a new name, which the powers of evil will not be able to prevail against. So this idea of a name is significant. It may have looked something like this. This poor man was not of sound body or mind, and he took the opportunity to confront Jesus, and his evil spirit was cast out of him. So let's continue with the reading, verses 25 through 31. But Jesus rebuked him, that being the evil spirit, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once, his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Wow, what a story. Jesus prevailed over the evil spirit. At his command, "Be muzzled," the spirit convulsed, cried, and departed. These must have been visible phenomena that people saw and were astounded by. It says the onlookers were amazed at this new and powerful teaching. It's one thing to say something, but to back it up with action that produces this kind of results was amazing. It amazed them. And in this narrative in Mark, you're going to see many expressions for straightway, at once, next, right then. So I'm putting in red some of these temporal notes that indicate right away something else happens. It says at once, word of the power of Jesus spread throughout Galilee. And it also says immediately after leaving the synagogue, they go to the house of Simon and Andrew, where they meet Simon's mother-in-law. She's not just sick, she's incapacitated with a fever. So she's not able to ambulate or get around. But notice the time perspective here. Mark says they told Jesus about her at once. And Jesus took her by the hand and lifted her up, quickly healing her. You get the idea of the propulsive nature of Mark's gospel that makes it characteristic of Mark and is not repeated in the other three gospels in the New Testament. Out of gratitude to Jesus for healing her, or perhaps out of Mark's intention to prove that she was really healed and was able to work, she began to serve Jesus and the others. Jesus had told the evil spirit to be quiet, and there is no record of this healing being reported, but word gets out. The healing may have been something like this. Jesus healing Simon's mother-in-law. Evidently, several people lived in this house. So Jesus was doing what he could to bring blessing and help there. So extravagant preaching is the next thing. Verses 32 through 39 say, that evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed by demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. They knew his name. They had some inkling of the power of Jesus. An interesting sidebar comment that Mark uses to depict that. Then in the morning, notice the time signatures in Mark's gospel. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, everyone is searching for you. He answered, let us go to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do. And he went throughout all Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. So Sabbath ends at 5 o'clock p.m. on Saturdays. So after this time, Mark says at evening, a line of sick people and afflicted persons forms, coming to Jesus wanting to be healed. At least they had the good sense not to try to come during Sabbath for fear of being accused of working or doing improper activity on the Sabbath. Mark says that they waited at least until evening for this. So maybe there's some hyperbole or exaggerated statement in this, that the line forms and grows longer as word continues to spread to the whole city, not just to the synagogue or the region of the city that they live, but says the whole city was lined up outside the door. Well, so much for Jesus' wish for this to remain a secret, this secret that he was the Messiah. Everyone is looking for Jesus, which is the beginning of tragedy, according to some commentators, because they're looking to Jesus to get something out of him. Not to give something, but trying to use Jesus' power for their own benefit, which is not altogether bad. If you're hurt and lame, seek someone that can help you, but it's a beginning of a draining time where everybody wants something from Jesus. Crowds are seeking him wherever he goes. He can't keep it a secret. When you're doing good for people, casting out demons and helping people have a better life, that word spreads like wildfire. So everybody wants Jesus to bless them. Bishop Barclay, at this point in his commentary on the text, says, for one prayer that goes up to God in days of prosperity, 10,000 go up in times of adversity, exemplifying the effect of the tragedy, he calls it, of people seeking out Jesus for what Jesus can do for them, not for what they might be able to do for Jesus. It's clear, from Mark's account at least, that Jesus did not publicly and explicitly refer to himself as the Christ, though he understood his sonship at his baptism. he seems to want to keep it a secret or not to proclaim it openly until the right time. I believe Mark is showing us, depicts a progressive revelation of Jesus' identity. You know, as Jesus interacts more and more with the disciples, they learn more and more about his true nature. But, as the text suggests, Jesus goes global, preaching, healing, and casting out demons. He can't stay just at one place. I want to end this lesson by sharing with you a true tale of amazing extravagance. This is the extravagant, amazing nature, amazing extravagance of the gift of grace we have from the Lord. This occurred on Christmas Eve a year ago, 2022, in Madison, Indiana, not far from here in Louisville. At the North Madison Christian Church, the pastor wanted to illustrate God's extravagant gift, not just God's good gift of Advent, but the extravagant nature of God's grace. There's good and then there's extravagant good. So the pastor on Christmas Eve service orders from a deli, I think it was the Red Pepper Deli, still open on Christmas Eve, a couple of sandwiches to be delivered to the church. He arranged for them to be delivered during the service, and when the delivery person brought the sandwiches in, the pastor engages the delivery person in conversation on the stage before the congregation about Advent and what it means. So get that in your mind, get this picture. The guy working Christmas Eve, delivering sandwiches to a church. Sometimes religious people have a reputation of not being a good tipper, so maybe he was wondering if he was going to get a tip or what the size of his tip is. But the pastor is trying to preach a message to the congregation about God's extravagant gift so that they would learn and that also this delivery person might learn. So the pastor pays for the sandwiches along with a cash tip of $2,300. This is amazing extravagance. Flabbergasted the delivery person working Christmas Eve, trying to make ends meet. Had no concept or no idea that something like this would come his way. And yet, the true gift of grace at Advent is far greater, is far more extravagant than even this $2,000 cash tip given to this delivery person who delivered a couple of deli sandwiches to the church on Christmas Eve. God's amazing, extravagant grace at Advent is far superior than that. This story is a true story. My daughter, who is a member of the North Madison Christian Church, shared that with me in tears about what a remarkable and powerful demonstration it was. And I don't know, it stayed with me and it has made me want to share the good news of Advent in a greater fashion as well. So what are our issues today from this lesson? Well, it's impossible to keep good news quiet, nor should we want to keep it quiet. We should trumpet our blessings box. We should trumpet the good we are seeking to do for others in the community. We can participate in the good news by finding ways to serve those in need, just as Jesus was doing. Jesus was amazingly extravagant in his preaching, teaching, and healing. Not just religious professionals, but all Christ followers can share the good news of God's kingdom. So thank you for joining me today. Don't take me too seriously. There are many ways to interpret Scripture. My views reflect a layperson's understanding. Remember our prayer concerns, and I hope to see you next week. Many thanks to Daryl for what he does to make these lessons a reality. And so until next week, I'll say goodbye.